Games journalism. Games journalism, chat. Games journalism. What the fuck? So, we're starting our little lecture today. We're gonna address right away the fact that games journalism, like, super sucks right now. It super sucks. And so, as you can see over here, games journalism, what the fuck? I want to talk a little bit about what exactly I mean by what the fuck. So, picture this. Picture that you are an individual who grew up reading a lot of, let's say, articles from all sorts of different writers who took games either very seriously or wrote articles, wrote sort of like different pieces of either journalism or criticism, opinions, features, whatever, that really made you think that, like, video games are not just like a thing that you play, but a thing that can, like, have artistic value, can be meaningful, can talk about, I guess you could say, like, important cultural issues, right? Also, Anna, YouTube, yes, this one will go to YouTube. Thank you for the lurk, by the way, Daemonia. So let's say you grew up thinking games journalism is a thing, and the kind of criticism around games journalism, the criticism connected to games journalism, is a thing that proves that games have meaning, they have value, they are artistic experiences, and not just does it matter, like, people's relationships with video games, the relationships that they build, but not just doesn't matter, but you can make a living in some shape or form writing about it. Why? Because you check Kotaku, you check Polygon, you check Joystick every day, and you're like, wow, like, there are people who literally are just paid to write about video games. That's crazy. I could do that. That could be me, chat. That could be me. So in my case, that was my personal experience with games journalism as a kid. I remember very distinctly, like, being a young kid, like early teen years, and reading Kotaku and being like, I don't know what I want to do with my life. I feel like adulthood's gonna suck. But I could do this. I could absolutely do this. I could write about video games if I wanted to. And so, growing up, reading outlets like Joystick and Kotaku, I would check them, like, every day and read them because I knew, like, this was cool. And maybe I could do this one day. I could be a games journalist. So for a lot of folks that initially were interested in entering the industry, it's important to remember that a lot of us, especially those of us in our very early 30s and even our 20s, games journalism was a thing that was, like, very aspirational. Like, we felt like this is an industry that's growing. This is, excuse me, this is an industry that's given a lot to us early in our childhood and our teen years, and we could be part of that industry. We could potentially give back. So that for us was really important and was something that was extremely, extremely inspiring for us. Fast forward, if you're someone like myself who's like, wow, I could work in this field. Fast forward, like, a couple decades later, and when one like myself thinks about those earlier-ish years of games journalism versus where we are today, it feels like such a 180. It feels like we had so much opportunity and so much available, and it's just gone. It's just not available anymore. The opportunities are practically non-existent, and the opportunities that do exist, it's like the market is, like, basically oversaturated. Like, it's sort of to a point where it's like you're kind of, like, in competition with everyone that you've ever met, anyone that you know, to get specific jobs, specific opportunities, specific freelance positions in order to do the very simple thing of trying to pay the bills. Imagine that everyone that you've ever known, except like maybe 5 people in a specific industry, are all seeing the same job opening and are all applying to it. It is very discouraging, and it feels like what was once an abundance of opportunities has gone forever and is not there anymore. It's not just in the what the fuck part over here. It's not just, oh my god, like there was so many opportunities in the past and now they're all gone. The other part of this what the fuckery is that it felt like back in the day, games journalism was a little bit of a Wild West. Like, you might not see games journalism write about things that, let's say if you're someone like myself, you know, like 2008, 2007, I was using 4chan at a very young age. I should not have been. I was like 13 or 14. But, you know, I was on like 4chan's V and stuff like that. And like, you know, there was stuff that I would see 4chan talk about and I would just be sitting there and being like, oh, like Kotaku would never write about it. Like, there's no way that like Joystick would write about this conversation that's happening on like 4chan about this specific thing. But it did still feel like at the time that like Kotaku or Joystick or any of the other sites available, they still had this kind of like, feeling that you never really knew what they're going to write about. I think a really good example of this is when Kara Elson was at Rock Paper Shotgun. She actually had a sex column. Like, I remember reading that column and being like, wow, I could do this specifically. Like, I could specifically write about sex in video games. And then also seeing so many people write about like twine games at the time, you know, like interactive fiction games that were like, you know, adult or had sexual or romantic themes, the number of indie games and people whose whole job was just to write about indie games. Like, literally they would sit down and be like, oh, today I'm going to write about this cool indie game that I saw everyone talking about on Twitter, or this cool indie game I saw on Tumblr. Like, there was a time where if you worked in games journalism, if you were a freelance contributor or even a full-time contributor, that could be your job for you. All you did was sit at home and be like, boop, 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 boop. This game about feminist explorations of bodies is based. Send, published, collect $100. Like that, especially when I was in college, the industry was getting a lot like that. And that was an experience for me that was particularly inspirational because, again, I had that same feeling that I did as a kid, right? It felt like this is an industry where kind of the shit that's going on in other parts of media, like a little bit more censorship of stuff like that, or like the most independent of independent things are not taking seriously. In games journalism, well, it kind of is taken seriously. Like, you kind of can write about that stuff. You know, I've been pretty open about the fact that like my very big major inspiration to become like an adult games journalist was reading State of Play and read this like book essay collection right around the time of Gamergate. And there was this essay that was all about like I forget like the specific name of it, but it was connected to like a lecture series that was going to different colleges, and it was about like analyzing the relationship between sex and video games and the messages about sexuality that are placed not so much in just the stories that we tell, but the mechanics that we play in games like God of War. And I remember reading that and I was just like, oh my god, that's sick. Like, I could do that. That could be my living. I could make a living this way. That's crazy. So when I say what the fuck, I'm talking about 12 years time. If I started in the industry about 10 years ago, technically more like 2012 I started in the industry, but if I've been in the industry for about a decade, the what the fuck here is not just about like, yo, what happened to the cool opportunities and vibes of what I grew up with, but what happened to the opportunity that it was a Wild West wasteland where anything goes and anything could happen, and you could write about sexuality from like almost like a games criticism perspective, almost the same way you would do like movie criticism, and you would get published in a book. That is not the case anymore. That is not the case. That is not the case, and it's not coming back anytime soon. It's not coming back anytime soon. So, the big question that I have today is not just simply games journalism. What the fuck? But, whoa, hold on 1 second. Okay. But how, whoa. Why is this so deep in there? It's not like working correctly. Okay. How could this happen? How could something like this happen? Where we go from an era where it feels like the sky is the limit and there's so much opportunity for kind of like marginalized voices. There's so many opportunities to talk about sex and sexuality, like romance and like these kind of cool indie games that are coming out. How do we go from this period where it's like that is going on and there is this just kind of like plethora of opportunities to write about stuff, to a landscape where it's all fluff. All you can write about is like this cool hidden Silk Song Easter egg that you never would have known about, and it's written by someone who's never played like Hollow Knight in their life at all. Like, how did we go from stuff that really pushed the envelope to stuff that tucked the envelope in, that was like, nope, this is, we are a little turtle in our shell and we are not coming out, we're writing fluff, and even if we're independent journalists, we are writing fluff. Like, fluff is what we do. How did it happen like that, and how did we get there? And that is kind of the main thing that I want to talk about today, as like the agenda of conversation. It seems like that in a lot of markets, but definitely in a niche one like games journalism, it hits harder. I think that's something a lot of people are missing in this specific conversation. It's not just that like the journalism landscape as a whole is dwindling and diminishing and shrinking and kind of a shadow of itself. Although that's true, it's that when something like that happens in the media landscape, and when something like games journalism that has specific weak points is hit, what ends up happening is games journalism takes a much harder kind of hit on the skull than something like, say, politics journalism, which can weather the storm of even the worst circumstances of an industry falling apart, because people are always going to need politics news in some shape or form. People are always going to gravitate to it in some shape or form, but games journalism is one of those things that's seen as expendable, that's seen as not super important, that we can kind of get rid of if the economy is not that great, or we can deprioritize spending on, we can deprioritize reading, and if like advertising money dries up, well, advertisers are going to deprioritize us in the first place. And also, like, for like major media conglomerates that own a lot of different brands, games journalism outlets are seen as an easy place to cut. So stuff like that. The ad market, fucked it, honestly. There is a lot going on. There's a lot going on to describe like how games journalism fell apart like this. How'd you get here? I put you away. Me when I come back from work and my puppy girl isn't in her kennel. I guess I'm here just in time for games journalism. You bet you are. You came in just in time. Okay, so let us talk not just about the kind of purview over here, but let us have a conversation specifically about what games journalism is. What the fuck is games journalism? Like, what is it truly? Because I'm not to be like, we must define the thing we must talk about, but low-key, we must define the thing we must talk about low. One of the reasons why I want to define it as well is because there are a lot of things that look like games journalism out there now, and there's a lot of things where people reject that they're part of games journalism when they are. So I want to give my personal definition of what I believe games journalism is. And this is not an excuse for you all to look at my nice plump ass. Definitely not the case. Totally not the case, by the way. I have an iteration of this model with like thick booby and big hip, but I couldn't get it uploaded God, isn't this so sick? Don't I look like so butch, chat? I'm like, not butch even, just like, I don't know. What's like that kind of thing where like femme but a little mask with it? Daddy, maybe? I'm so daddy. Femme daddy. Femme daddy. I guess I'm a femme daddy. Be a good thick booty for your thick brain. You know what they say, thick booty, thick brain. Oh yeah. All right, chat. All right. So, let me move this. Yeah, there we go. I like that. Okay. So, couldn't upload too much hip, like, actually, though. So, what is games journalism? Like, what exactly is games journalism? We were talking a lot about the idea of it, but what the fuck is it really? So, probably explains my smooth brain. I got a flat ass. Hey. So, in my opinion, I would describe games journalism as any form of written work with a journalistic perspective or journalistic aims that is either A, published, or B, goes through a significant editorial process, in which C, aims to engage in journalistic reporting, fact-based opinionated work, or otherwise long-form feature reporting about the world of video gaming and adjacent games-related things, when specifically working in conjunction with either an outlet or an independent venture that has solid editorial resources and guidelines. So what that means is essentially that I personally see games journalism as both news reporting, long-form reporting, feature story rating, op-eds, and opinion pieces. I think technically that fits in the realm of games journalism, but also, and this is a controversial one, published and edited through a outlet with an editorial process, games criticism. I also believe that technically fits in the realm of games journalism because oftentimes games criticism in the traditional sense is running through outlets, it's running through publications that work in some shape or form of fact-based and kind of like rigorously edited, detailed, fact-checked information around the games industry. And also that I personally believe that a lot of games criticism, while its aim is to analyze, criticize, and create opinions around gaming content, it is also ultimately still part of a sort of media enterprise that looks to inform, to bring information to the masses, and to bring, I would say, perspectives and analysis that goes through a rigorous, again, fact-checked editorial process, and it often is stapled to a lot of more traditional journalistic enterprises. Like the longer history of games criticism, and when I say games criticism, I mean things like, say, opinion stories that analyze like the gameplay mechanics of, say, like a Metroid game. A lot of the longer history of that happening is not like zines doing it or like games criticism publications that exist just to do criticism. Like the longer history of it is like that kind of work gets done at like a place that does news reporting. So Oxford Dictionary defines games journalism as. Now, I will be clear that while I do believe most forms of games criticism could technically fall under the purview of games journalism, what I will say is that that's not necessarily true of all games criticism. If you're working with a zine, if you're doing like an independent sort of like critical analysis project, a little bit almost like, say, like the Paris Review style stuff, you could technically say that that's not games journalism. But I would say the lion's share of actual criticism that happens in the world of games media is happening attached to a publication that handles news around video gaming in some shape or form. And a lot of games criticism work is kind of stapled to or attached to a larger news venture. So for example, it was not uncommon at Gamers for like or Daily Dot as well to write like a straight news hit about like something that happened and then do like kind of like a day two take about it. That was like opinion, analysis, things like that. And that could also kind of go as well for things like, you know, like maybe someone writes about like a preview for a game and then someone does like analysis about like representation. Like a lot of the games criticism that I did about trans stuff in Cyberpunk 2077 at Daily Dot, a lot of that stuff I did a little bit of news rating and then I would do opinion pieces, but I would consider all of that, even the more criticism stuff, I would still consider that in the purview of games journalism. You could technically say that like what we're really talking about here is more games media, but oftentimes the games criticism coming from these journalistic outlets, these editorial outlets, a lot of time that stuff is still going through an editorial process that tends to link back to news reporting and things like that. So I technically consider it in the purview of journalistic work, if that makes sense. I think a lot of times people want to essentially say that games criticism is not games journalism and that games critics are not necessarily journalists, but a lot of times what they are still doing is they're trying to take fact-based discussions of something where they do in fact report some news in some shape or form, like they describe something, they analyze it, they bring the latest news about something, and then they go into detail about it. And usually, inevitably, in some shape or form, they are doing some aspect of journalism. So that's what I would say. I wish I could upload the full hip version of this avatar. It was curvy, chat. It was curvy. So with that out of the way, that means we must talk about what isn't games journalism. What it's not. Okay. So if I just described with my hot take what is games journalism, then what is not games journalism? And so here's a couple things that I consider not games journalism. First of all, burp. First of all, if you are working in some shape or form, some capacity as a streamer, as a YouTuber, as some sort of kind of like content creator where you're not going through an editorial process at all, if you're just kind of like throwing video essays up or you're just kind of looking at news and being like, oh my God, that happened today, chat. I don't consider that games journalism. I think really what's important to clarify with the state of games journalism and this discussion around games journalism is we are talking about outlets. We are talking about brands that have a publication process where work is in some shape or form reviewed, it's gone through scrutiny, it's edited in some shape or form, or otherwise there are like significant editorial standards for the publication of material where you have to go through a process where like you talk to an editor, there's a manager that you work with, basically some shape or form where there are journalistic standards for publication of material. I would say for a lot of streamers, a lot of video essayists, a lot of YouTubers, that doesn't really exist. Like those rigorous journalistic standards don't necessarily exist. What they do is they write out scripts. Maybe they kind of have someone they pay to do it. Maybe they do it themselves. They voice the scripts, or maybe instead of a script, they have an outline that they go through on stream. So there's no real kind of like editorial process that they go through. And then they're just kind of posting it to their channel as a personality, as a brand. Now, could you say that what they're doing is news? Yeah, I do think that like if you're kind of like, let me put it this way. Alyssa Mercante is a games journalist, but she's a games journalist that's mostly moved to content creation. Now, could you say that what she is doing with content creation on Twitch has journalistic elements? Yes, of course. Is she doing that content creation work attached to any kind of outlet where there's like a rigorous editorial process that she goes through, where she talks to like an editor, where there's like a legal team helping her, all of those things? No, that doesn't really exist for Alyssa. She's a little bit more on her own in that regard. Now, I still consider what she's doing very journalistic. I consider her also a very good project, but it doesn't necessarily mean she's part of the games journalism industry. What we're very specifically talking about here ultimately is, by and large, traditional games media that is printed and published, whether digitally or in print. That is mainly what we're talking about. I would also say, like I mentioned, I said that most games criticism that's going through places like Polygon or etc., that is games journalism. But if it's just kind of like a zine, if you're just publishing in a publication that just exists to do opinion pieces, that's not games journalism. And a lot of those outlets operate adjacent to but slightly outside of games journalism. Now, you could argue they fall under the same category of games media, but what I'm mostly interested in is this question, and kind of de facto, most games critics are connected to the games journalism world in some shape or form. So a group like Gamesplain would not technically be a games journalist channel. I'm not as familiar with Gamesplain anymore. Can you tell me a bit about it? Also, I'm going to drink my Pocari Sweat. So, if there's any brief questions about what I just explained, go for it while I'm looking all funny while I get my Pocari Sweat. Delicious Pocari Sweat. Yummy Pocari Sweat. Yummy, yummy, yummy. 1 second. Yeah, I forgot to mention my Pocari Sweat did in fact come in like a little while ago. Oh my god, I've gone through like most of it already. Thank you so much for it. It's so delicious. Oh my god. I fucking love Pocari Sweat, dude. I'm actually that Pocari Sweat girl. They're a group that talks about game reviews, updates and such. Kind of like a news kind of thing, mainly what Coop described. I would say if they're not connected to an outlet or brand or company that either A, has roots in the games journalism world, or B, has some sort of editorial process at play, then I wouldn't technically consider games journalism. I would still consider, like, you know, like when you would have like the Giant Bomb crew or the Remap crew, like I would consider what they're doing games journalism still. But if it's just like some folks that are kind of like doing their own thing with content creation where they go through news, but they're not really connected to the traditional kind of brands with an editorial process, then I would consider that not necessarily games journalism. If that makes sense to you all. It really depends, though. Like, another key part of this also is, like, there's a gray area where it's, like, maybe technically, like, it's opinion kind of podcast sort of vibe going on, but, like, that place is connected to the world of games journalism because, like, they are connected to, like, some sort of, like, journalistic enterprise, and ultimately their goal is to, you know, provide news, provide fact-based information. Like, I would say a lot of the stuff that was happening with like podcasts at places like Polygon or Kotaku, or like even what Aftermath is doing with like their Twitch stuff, like that is still in the world of games journalism. Something like Nintendo Life would count more, which are a journalist website that adapts their articles into video. Yes, I would agree with that 100%, Chloe. Like, that is classic games journalism. The group that talk. Oh wait, no, I read that. Remap, yes. Giant Bomb, no longer. I would say. I think it's still strongly. I think it's still connected de facto into the world of games journalism, like de facto, like because what they ultimately are still trying to do is create some form of. Let me put it this way. The Giant Bomb folks are grandfathered into this stuff because they have been in it for so long. So it's not like they can just easily leave it. Does that kind of make sense? Like, de facto for me, what I'm doing is not necessarily games journalism, but like, it's not games journalism, but if I had like a company behind me and there was even a slight editorial process behind what I was doing, it would automatically flip the switch to doing games journalism again. And so that's kind of how I feel with what's going on with Giant Bomb. I also think just in general, like, again, they have been doing in some shape or form what they've been doing in the industry for such a long time that they're kind of grandfathered into this definition, because what games journalism is like not just literally journalism about games, but it's also an industry. It's an industry that's operating and thus is in flux and changing. Didn't Giant Bomb like didn't they like retain the name or something? Like, didn't they come in and like kind of buy it back or something like that? Let me double check. because that was a big deal at Vice, because my editor wrote about that, and then like Vice was like, take down that article, you can't talk about Old Waypoint, because he was like trying to clear the air about it. Yeah, they bought it back recently, right? This was like a whole thing. Giant Bomb has been acquired by its former staff 5 months ago. Giant Bomb lives. Fandom has sold the site to us and is now fully independent and employee owned. We'll see you all on Tuesday for the Giant Bomb cast. This was 5 months ago from Giant Bomb. Well, it's employee owned now, akin to Second Wind. And I would consider ultimately what they do is still in the realm of games journalism again, because they're kind of grandfathered into it at this point. So. Yeah, fandom is not a great place to be. So. Although I will admit, just in general, I was never like a big Giant Bomb kind of listener. Like, I would check the website and stuff like that, but I was never like a Giant Bomb girly. But I would say like what's going on with Giant Bomb is like de facto they still are grandfathered into the world of games journalism. Jeff Grubb, Dan Reichert, Mike Minotti, Jeff Bacalar. Well, it's employee owned and self-run now. Publications and outlets do change like that. That happens all the time. I think Giant Bomb just has a brand that has made as a brand attached to a lot of the personalities that have been there in some shape or form, so people have opinions about what Giant Bomb is now compared to what it used to be. But people also would have the right to have the same opinions about, for example, how the Mary Sue has changed, and the difference between what the Mary Sue was when I first wrote for them in 2016 between what they are now in 2024, 2025, and what they were kind of in the interim period when they were first purchased by gamers. So I would say that as well. That's a little bit also like de facto, like Giant Bomb is part of the games journalism world, and especially as an employee like owned one, the realm of independent games journalism is something I want to talk about as well as the stream goes on. Anyway, so with my definitions of what is games journalism, i.e. fact-based, editorial process-based, and outlet brand-based forms of fact-based journalistic efforts around games in some shape or form, versus what's not, which is sort of like content creation outside of that realm, and also kind of just like zines about games criticism compared to games criticism attached to journalistic enterprises. That's sort of basically the two areas I'm operating from for this stream. Essentially, what I'm really interested in is sort of what I would consider the legacy aspect of how people get news about games journalism, the legacy world of digital and also print journalism versus criticism. I'm not as much interested in unless it pertains to this, but also how things are changing with content creation, i.e. stuff like what I'm doing. So with that out of the way, with all the definitions, let's start about the cardinal sins of games journalism, because there are many. There are many we must discuss. Yes, indeed. So, where'd I go? Whoa. Where did the thing go, actually? Oh, this is the wrong area. I meant to go the other way. Whoopsies. Lol. Okay, here we go. Whee. All right. So, let us discuss the cardinal sins of games journalism. What I want to talk about is, a lot of times when people talk about games journalism falling apart, what they tend to say is that, well, it was really kind of Gamergate that ruined everything, and Google, and, ad algorithms, and nobody wants to work anymore. And it's like, well, what's going on with Google is important, but there's a lot more behind the scenes going on that we need to discuss. than just simply SEO slop, AI, all those things that you normally get cited. So, one of the first and major cardinal sins of games journalism is the enthusiast press. The existence of a press that in some shape or form exists to hype up games, talk about like games as essentially this thing that like, you know, your life revolves around buying them. It's like part of your identity. There's not as much critical analysis of games. In the early history of games journalism, pretty much all of it was in some shape or form enthusiast press, to the point that people often think that games coverage, like reviews and things like that, to this day are like always bought by publishers and developers. And like if you look at pretty much any games journalist website, they'll make it very clear their ethics policy is that that's not going to happen. But games journalism has a very long history of not really being a journalistic enterprise that exists to have like serious conversations of immense objectivity around video games, but kind of cheer them on a little bit, you know, kind of be like, that's right, I play video games too. I fucking love video games. I'm so hyped for the next Battle Duty, Call of Field, you know, it's kind of shit like that. So the history of the enthusiast press itself, I feel like we really tend to see the enthusiast press kind of become a very obvious issue in games journalism as the kind of print media landscape really grows significantly. I feel like there's kind of like this spectrum essentially of enthusiasts versus not. Hey, Flabberjiggles, good to have you. I love video games. I play Candy Crush Saga every day. You're just like all the NYPD officers on my subway. My subway block stop. So the enthusiast press itself, I would say there's kind of a spectrum with it. There's sort of like outlets that have always had sort of like a fun, friendly tone around gaming, but were prone to criticism, like kind of Kotaku, especially in the early days of Kotaku before it became particularly serious, as you saw kind of the golden years of like Nathan Grayson and like Cecilia D'Anastasio and stuff like that. But the early years of Kotaku, I would kind of put up there. And then you have kind of like the opposite side of like the enthusiast press, which is like, if all this is like the enthusiast press, the opposite side of the enthusiast press is like Nintendo Life. Like literally a publication owned by Nintendo exists as a PR arm for Nintendo, and Nintendo fans look back at Nintendo Life to this day, and the thought is not like, isn't it kind of fucked up that there's like a whole magazine that exists to promote Nintendo, but it looks a little journalistic, but it's not? Like, instead, people are like, oh my god, Nintendo Life, that was the bomb. Or Nintendo Power, I'm sorry. Nintendo Power, that was the bomb. That was the shit. That was so fucking great. I love Nintendo fucking Power. That shit was amazing. That shit was epic and based. Like, there is this kind of idea that, hey, Wilma, that's something like that. And it was often you kind of like, people didn't really think about it through, as you sort of said. Like, people didn't really think it through fully. There is this kind of idea that like something like Nintendo Power, even though it was owned by Nintendo, to this day, most people don't sit there and say like, wasn't it kind of fucked up that it happened that way? Like, most people will sit there and say like, Nintendo Power, thank you for the lurk, Cassie, Nintendo Power was awesome and based and so cool, and I love it, and that was excellent, and that was amazing. Like, that is sort of the issue that has happened with the enthusiast press aspect. Like, to this day, even when people think about the older years of video games journalism, where we really should stop and think, what were some of the serious issues that brought us to this point in time with games journalism? A lot of people sit there and say, hey, you know, even that stuff that wasn't so great about games journalism, like, people don't really stop and say, like, that was a fucked up thing that happened. They tend to look back and say, that was an amazing, cool, epic-based thing. Even now to this day, there is a lot, in my opinion, there has been, what's the right way to put it? I really feel like there's a lot of pressure put on games journalists to be kind of like, it's kind of hard to describe it exactly, but it's almost like um it's almost like people sat there and like wanted the games press to increasingly not be a critical thing, something that asks serious questions, something that questions the way businesses are operating, questions the way that developers and publishers are operating, and especially the way those companies are treating women and other marginalized groups. There's always been this kind of tension and pressure for games journalists to really be kind of advocates for, like, essentially like the games industry, and advocates for like the consumer, in the sense that like games journalism should be like celebrating games and talking about how cool and epic and amazing they are. There's been a lot of antagonism over the years when games journalists try to stray from the enthusiast model and take games more seriously and demand like social and cultural issues be brought to the forefront, or to have more kind of serious examination of what's happening in the industry. There's traditionally been a lot of pushback against that. There's been a lot of feelings of like the primary goal of games journalism is to talk about how cool video games are. So there's also been a lot of pressure against games journalists not to take gaming as an industry, as a medium, particularly seriously. So true, Piss Hospital, good to have you. All those reviews that got me all hyped for games to come out, they were fucking ads disguised as journalism. Exactly. The other thing too is when you have this issue of kind of like the enthusiast press itself, I mention it as an original sin because sort of what's happened with games journalism is there was an era of media and writing and news, print publications, and also online publications that did mostly exist to hype up video games, to talk about video games in the sense of like, get ready for this cool new thing. Everyone's excited for this cool new thing. You know, this cool thing is based in Epic. And as time went on, even in the era where we started to see more journalistic reporting, more serious reporting about video games, at the same time, you always had this strand in games journalism that existed very specifically to just continue to talk about like, this cool game is coming out, here's when this cool game is coming out, all the cool things you can expect when cool game is coming out, all the cool additions of cool game, here's all the Easter eggs in cool game that's about to come out. Like, there was always this aspect that even when the industry was trying to get more serious, it was still operating in a very enthusiast way. There was still like this element in the industry that was mostly focused on like, here's all the cool based epic things about video games coming out. And that strand goes back to a much longer history that's especially rooted in print media around games journalism, magazines that really tried to get people to purchase those magazines by hyping up video game releases through previews, screenshots, interviews, things like that. Remember when Gerstmann go fired because he gave Kanye and Lynch a 6.5 and they're paying for ads on GameSpot? Yeah, I mean, like, I would say stuff like that happening, especially these days, is far rarer. Like, it just doesn't happen. But there was absolutely more of a cesspool era of games journalism in the past. But the idea that games journalism is like just completely and utterly like that Kane and Lynch thing was like so many years ago. Like, it doesn't really operate quite like that anymore. Like, it just doesn't. I don't know why I read it, Kanye. Dyslexia. Sometimes it feels like people want their opinions validated, but not too much that it feels paid for exactly. Yeah. Reddit Kanye. Reddit Kanye. So I would definitely say there's always been this element in games journalism of a very enthusiast style press. There's always been this element in games journalism of, even in the years in the 2010s when we were having more serious conversations, there's always been, and more serious reporting, really kind of a growth of the industry into something that is like more journalistic in nature, that's independent from heavy reliance on PR and publishers. You still have this fundamental element in games journalism that is, rewriting PR copy, that is, getting PR emails, rewriting news that's basically prepared by PR. You still have this element of like, the biggest and coolest thing of my career is that I interviewed like a developer that I like stuff like that has continued to be part of games journalism and will continue to be so. Another cardinal sin of games journalism. Where is it? There it is. Another cardinal sin of games journalism. Low expertise. All right, so what do I mean by that, chat? Well, that's what I mean by a burp. Another big thing that's happened in the world of games journalism over the years is kind of like this loss of trust in games journalists. Like, people no longer really trust games journalists at all to provide factual information, to be experts in the things that they discuss. People just don't really trust like games journalists, period. And there is a much longer history, in my personal opinion, of games journalists struggling to show expertise. What I mean by that is, what's the right way to put it? A couple months back at Vice, I wrote this article that was sort of like an examination of the question of do games journalists need to be good at video games? And the answer I basically had to that question was, it is really hard for a games journalist to be an expert at all video games. That's just not really possible. A games journalist has to build the skills of being a good reporter. They have to build the skills of being a good writer. They are also not given the resources to just practice and play any given video game as much as they want. Usually a lot of games journalists specialize in like a specific genre or a specific series or kind of games, or maybe like a specific company's games, i.e. like Nintendo's games is what I mean in that instance. And maybe they don't necessarily have, say, like expertise on the FPS genre, or although they could write a news story about a Call of Duty press release. Unfortunately, the games journalism industry has operated in a way where it's actually really discouraged resource or skill building around the actual world of getting good, playing, and perfecting video games themselves. And a lot of individuals in the games journalism world have shown a certain level of lack of expertise around even some of the games they're asked to cover. There's a lot of reasons for this. There's a lot of reasons why this has emerged. I personally feel like, as someone that's gone through the interview process at different, like, in games journalism, like at specific different outlets, and also has talked to different editors about like what their priority is when they're looking to hire, usually as a general rule of thumb in the world of games journalism, actually being good at video games is not really a high priority at all. And it kind of makes sense, right? Like, if your job is to write about video games, what's the most important skill to have, like, above all? It's to be a good writer, right? To be good at words, right? Goodly, you know? Thank you for the lurk, by the way, Ultra Fighter. So, it's really hard. It's really, really, really hard to, if your priority is you have a limited budget, you have maybe a tight budget, especially in the 2010s, this increasingly emerged. And what's most important for you is to have writers that you know are good writers and that they can basically more or less understand whatever's thrown at them with a little bit of time of research and a little bit of practicing. It's really important for that specific kind of writer to get hired. It's less important for example, maybe your outlet is interested in covering Valorant, but it's not like a key core area of focus. What's more important is like making sure like all of the Nintendo, like, I don't know, like all the Nintendo releases for like circa 2021 or whatever are being covered and covered goodly and covered correctly. Like, it's very important to hire in a way where like you can trust that like the strategic goals there are going to be met. Then, for example, like hiring someone to write Valorant guides when they're just going to write 3 or 4 of them, you can honestly probably get someone who just very casually plays Valorant to write a few Valorant guides for like SEO reasons, if relevant, important, urgent, etc. So what's happened over time is kind of a prioritization of skill over a prioritization in any shape or form of very strong expertise. Now, there are solutions to this. Obviously, the big one is resources, right? Literally just getting more people hired that are both good writers and also good at video games. Like, it's kind of a big way out of this, but like, that's like a luxury hire. Like, there are probably like 5 games journalists that fit that bill, and most of them are in esports in some shape or form to begin with, and are specializing in like a specific esport. So it's like very hard to begin with to like hire for that. But also too, the second solution is building, as I wrote about for Vice a couple months ago, is building a way in some shape or form for writers to get recreational time to build up their skills. What I mean by that is literally you have a writer work like 4 days a week, and then on the 5th day, on Friday, that's rec time. They are asked to do a little bit of practice on their writing skills, a little bit of practice on their journalistic skills, and a little bit of practice on their gaming skills. Whatever game that is their focus, whatever area of focus that they've been doing as their beat in journalism, they need to play those video games for like 4 or 5 hours. Now, that is not going to happen. That is not going to happen because articles need to get written. There's no money to support that. You're basically having everyone in some shape or form work 4 days a week instead of 5. And even if it would lead to better reporting, a lot of the ways that games journalism outlets, enterprises, and entities are built is that the upper level management is going to stress that you get in people that can write, or at least reasonably write on time, file quick and fast. Those people are going to be hired, and you're going to be laughed out of the room if you ever suggest to anyone in a managerial position that like maybe we should make sure that our writers sound like they're particularly skilled at video games, because the bar has gotten so low for games journalism and games media that passably sounding like you understand a video game has sort of been the encouraged bar by management, by editors, by folks that run games journalism, run companies that own games journalism websites. Sounding reasonably knowledgeable about a video game has become the standard in the industry. It's impossible to hire experts in a way where they are actually taught and they're actually perfecting expertise around a video game. So, you might be asking, why do we have so many experts doing content creation? Well, there's a difference between your goal as an editor is to hire people that can write well and generally cover any subject matter, which is honestly not a bad way to hire. Like, you will get done what you need to, which is reasonably skilled, reasonably researched reporting. But a content creator that is very, very, very like they've perfected their knowledge about a video game, it's often a self-driven project, right? This is one of the places where games journalism and content creation start to split apart, even when content creation is more fact-based, is trying to do some level of news reporting. Like, for example, saying, what's up, gamers? Here's the latest in the world of Helldivers 2. Like, those specific YouTubers are like hyper fixated and hyper focused on Helldivers, and they're able to because either it's a hobby, it's something that they're trying to build as a solo career option, and 3, and most importantly, they're able to grow their channel around Helldivers news, features, opinions, whatever, using Helldivers as just a generic example, around Helldivers content on YouTube in a way that your traditional website would not be able to. Why? Because there's an element that YouTuber is trustworthy, and that YouTuber has to be trustworthy, because if that YouTuber does not understand what they're talking about, eventually people are going to figure out that YouTuber is bad and dumb at what they do, and the algorithm is going to start to punish them for it. The algorithm is not going to show their content as much unless there's some other appeal. Like, for example, they're a bad Helldivers news reporter, but a really good, like, clickbait anti-woke YouTuber, which is why you see a lot of failed like gaming content YouTubers go in the like anti-woke grifter direction. So, all right, let me reach out. That explains the Cuphead tutorial. So that was the Cuphead tutorial is actually something I wrote about in that specific article, and it really stressed like that was someone who was like very busy at a convention, who was kind of focused on other things, and like is just not like a platformer. Like if you brought like a platformer games journalist over to that convention to go play Cuphead, they probably would not have like submitted such like strange copy. Also, they kind of knew that their gameplay was bad and they did it as a joke. They were like, oh, this would be funny if we uploaded it because they struggled with the tutorial. Honestly, I feel like every game genre needs at least two writers, an expert and someone more tangentially related. I'm curious about different perspectives on games that's solely the opinion of an expert, although it's a very valuable perspective to have. I definitely think it's the right way to put it. One of the issues is, while it's good to have the perspective of someone who is an outsider to a game in order to write about and discuss it, sadly, it's gotten to the point in games journalism where the outside perspective is sort of just de facto the default perspective about most video games, because it is just kind of rare that, like, you know, like, I don't know, like, what's the right way to put it? Like, a lot of times a games journalism website will have people that are maybe like hyped for Nintendo releases in some shape or form, or like maybe hyped for like key specific multiplayer games, but they're not going to be hyped for like all of the big games and all of the game of the month games that come out. They're not going to be particularly interested in those games beyond, you know, kind of like taking one for the team and doing the coverage that's asked of them. So what often ends up happening in those instances, right, is like you're usually getting people that are kind of learning after the facts about a video game and have the perspectives of being after the fact. It is somewhat rare, although it does happen, but it is somewhat rare for a games journalist to actually specifically understand the way that a fandom thinks about things, the actual player with like hundreds of hours in a game thinks about things. Sometimes those journalists can do a really good job of like capturing the feeling, the vibes, but most of the time I see journalists do that at best, like trying to report on like a fandom or community. Like it's very rare that like a lot of games journalists even take seriously like a specific fandom of a video game. You know, like they're just not really like sitting there thinking about like, gee, this like very small one-off sentence I have about this item in League, like I wonder how like the League fandom feels about it. Like a lot of times, especially these days, like a guide writer for like if they're just tasked to like write about like a League item, unless they're like working in an outlet that prizes like hiring people that really understand League well, they're just going to be like, okay, I'll just write this guide to like what this item you can buy as League is, and then that's $15 or whatever, you know. It's like not, especially in today's day and age, like the pay is so low, and the like you must be a general expert and you must get any work available, you must take it kind of vibes of games journalism has made it really hard for like experts to even emerge anymore. Everything is like, in order to get work, you must be a generalist. An editor can also teach writing skills, but cannot teach acuity at games. It's very true. Although I do think games are like any skill. The more you play them, the more you seriously try to work at them, anyone can get good at a game. It's like a sport, you know, like anyone can get good at a sport. All you have to do is practice and like seriously have confidence that you can get better at it. Like if you sit there and say like, oh my God, like I suck at basketball and I'm never going to be good at basketball because I suck at basketball, then yeah, you're never going to get good at basketball. I'm getting my Picard sweat. But if you sit there and tell yourself, well, I suck at basketball now, but in 2 months, I could be good at basketball. If I seriously sit down and try to get good at basketball, then you will, in fact, get good at basketball eventually. I love like how I look kind of happy, just like, hey, look at me, where'd my arms go? I'm just kind of vibing right now. Oh my God. Damn, I can do that. Maybe I should be a games journalist. How come we don't call them journalists? Gornalists. Who's up with their gornalism? Okay, let me get my hands back. My delicious, delicious hands. Yummy, 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 yummy. Yoink. Okay. Yippee. Okay. Gornolus. The algorithm takes no prisoners. Yeah, if you suck at what you do, the algorithm is gonna know and it's gonna hate you. That's just how it works. Like, the algorithm's gonna figure it out. It's gonna be like, nope, fuck you. All right, wait, hold on. There we go. Hey there, gamers. Are you sick of seeing politics shoved in your face when you play online games? Game allows trans people with the woke mind virus to put a flag in their name. What's next? Requiring minors to be on puberty blockers to play Get Politics Out of Our Games, a failed game creator channel generally. Yeah, it's actually so true. Like, if you look at a lot of these people that go like in the anti-woke direction, what you will often find is that like they were trying to do just like general kind of like games analysis, news coverage, etc., and they failed. And this is the only thing they can do because it's like so easy. It's going to get boosted to so many people's algorithms who already want that kind of content. YouTube will prioritize it, and it's just a situation where it's like those who cannot like do like anti-woke grift. Like, that's just the situation. I tend to see a lot of people get upset due to that outsider aspect. Saw a bunch of people get pissed with coverage of Shin Megami Tensei 5 because a journalist called it Persona without the heart. And Persona is actually a spin-off of SMT. Like, you can't just expect every person to know obscure knowledge like that. Okay, I will say SMT and Persona, it takes like 5 minutes to learn that like Persona was a spin-off of SMT. Like, it takes 5 minutes on Wikipedia. I actually feel like like anyone who wants to write about Shin Megami Tensei should have a general working knowledge of like Shin Megami Tensei history, like in a serious sense. Like, if anyone's gonna write like a feature story or opinion or a preview story or anything about Shin Megami Tensei or Persona, they should just know the history that like Persona came from SMT. Like, you don't get Persona without SMT. Like, that is the history. You don't get Persona without like SMT if, you know. Yeah, English weird. English is weird. Sitting watching someone play a loot game badly. Hey, have you considered get good? Get good. Your face is cute. Blah. Who's up being cute? The issue is that the pace that these articles or reviews need to be published doesn't allow for the time to get well versed at the games they cover. That's how I see it, at least. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Who bit my hand? Why'd you bite my hand? Huh? The more obscure thing to know is SMT was a book first, was it? I actually didn't know that. Now that's obscure. I didn't know that. I'm the games journalist here. But yes, low expertise. And what happens when low expertise emerges? Well, a simple thing, chat. Something I like to call, because this is connected, low trust. Low trust. Let's say that games journalism has been operating for a bit on the idea that the most important thing is not necessarily to be an expert at video games. That's actually barely important. Like, as long as you can generally get through a game, you're fine. But also that's the animating principle for so many years, to the point now where it is basically the core animating principle. We're really not hiring experts at all unless unless you are primarily like really good at writing a lot of things and can cover whatever's thrown at you. So what happens when this is the environment? It leads to low trust. If you, every single day, you go on a Twitter or like Reddit or YouTube or pop into a Twitch stream and someone is saying like, oh my god, this game's journalist like fucked up this description of a game, and this game's journalist fucked up this fact about a game, and this game's journalist doesn't understand this thing about a game, and this game's journalist and that game's journalist and this game's journalist and that game's journalist. Eventually what happens is there is a kind of like there is this moment where everything capsizes. The trust is gone because people have repeatedly seen over and over that this industry is one where experts generally are not present. People don't have significant and advanced expertise around something they cover because there's so many instances where mistakes big and small have emerged. To that point, trust is so low now that people tend to read bad faith into instances where people like mention what's the right way to put it? Trust has gotten so low to the point where people naturally assume journalists are simply prone to making mistakes and are going to continue to make mistakes and are not experts at what they cover. When I was at Vice, I wrote about an instance where Neanners had a Gamer Subs Cup when she was with VShojo. So it was like she had a Gamer Subs Cup. It was connected to VShojo. It was like a VShojo X Gamer Subs thing. And I said like VShojo star Neanners had a Gamer Subs Cup. And it was true that Neanners was at VShojo as a Gamer Subs, but is not a VShojo anymore. I mean, at the time VShojo existed. Now it doesn't exist. But because I said, VShojo star Neanners, everyone was like, oh my God, this journalist doesn't know anything about VTubing because she said Neanners is at VShojo. And that's not what I meant. What I meant was she had a VShojo X Gamer Subs Cup. Now, I decided I didn't want to go through people saying that I was not an expert at a VTuber I loved, so I just deleted VShojo. I just said Neanners had a cup at Gamer Subs. But this is what I mean about low trust. It gets to the point where people assume, like, if you write something in a way that maybe sounds a little disaccurate, like it sounds a little bit like you could be implying that, like, that VTuber, for example, is still VShojo, even if that was not the implication of that sentence. As a result, people are going to say, well, it's a journalist. Of course she's going to fuck it up. She doesn't know anything about VTubing. It's sort of been transferred over because it's in the same realm of, like, games journalists suck. VTubing, obviously, a games journalist that's going to cover VTubing at a games website is also going to suck. Those people weren't arguing in good faith. You would be surprised at the people who do read my stuff in good faith that were like, oh my God, you fucked up there, Anna. You would be surprised at the people that were like, you fucked up. And it's like, she was at VShojo at the time. I don't know what to tell you. It was technically like a VShojo X Gamer Subs Cup. So it's important to understand that, like, this issue of low trust, this issue is like breaks out of the shell of like bad faith analysis as well. People just generally assume journalists are not really knowledgeable what they cover. And the reason for that is simply because expertise has gotten so bad over time, and trust has gotten so bad, so low over time, that naturally everyone is going to assume, until and unless significantly proven otherwise, a games journalist is not good at what they do. That is just the nature of where things have headed in this industry. There's been such an erosion of expertise because there have not been hiring decisions made to prioritize expertise, which leads to low trust as mistake after mistake does in fact emerge, as people show that they don't really have full knowledge about the things they're expected to write about because maybe they're slightly new to a game that they have to cover, maybe they didn't play enough of it yet, all those sorts of things. The other thing that I need to stress as well is that there are a lot of games journalists. There are a significant amount that are experts in some shape or form, are really good at understanding the things they write about, either through research, just as a third party, like to something as an object, like sort of like distant person like looking into a game, or they are in fact like literally her, they are literally him, they are literally them, they are that experts about a game. But all of the instances of low expertise that have been demonstrated have resulted in an instance where trust has been eroded. So even though there are a lot of people that are really experts at something in games journalism, they are simply blocked out because of the fact that there are so many people that are making mistakes. There are so many outlets that are not prioritizing hiring based on expertise. There are so many outlets that don't have fact-checking, don't have rigorous fact-checking or the opportunity to fact-check. So it does a major disservice to all the games journalists that are really knowledgeable, because this is the environment now. People don't trust them. That's just the way it works. Okay, we'll say experts also make mistakes, but once you do that, forever haunts people. I think the thing is, Homer, that's important to stress here is, if games journalism was a space where a lot of people were demonstrating expertise, people would be more forgiving of mistakes, because they would understand this writer is really good at what they do, this writer is an expert, This writer is part of an industry that's demonstrated time and time again accountability when mistakes do happen. This writer has demonstrated that they do their research. This industry has demonstrated that prioritizes people that are really good at research. And what we've seen in games journalism again is that this is not prioritized. Like, it's just not. Like, we all know examples of a games journalism piece that had factual errors. God knows I've discussed pieces on here that have factual errors. I've said, like, I love this outlet, or it's cool that this outlet covered this, but they got this wrong, they got that wrong, they got this wrong, they got that wrong. And I feel stressed to do that because I need to protect myself, right? Like, I am like 1 foot in, 1 foot out of games journalism, and I definitely want to establish to people that I'm not going to sit here and pussyfoot around this issue. Like, I'm going to sit there and say, like, I think this outlet did a bad job covering this, and it follows a trend of this outlet or this writer or the industry today struggling to demonstrate expertise. So it is a major problem, and I think people would be more forgiving of mistakes that do happen if the general reputation of games journalism was not sunk by this legitimate issue. This is a legitimate issue. This is a legitimately major issue. I stress that because I've seen it personally. Like, I've seen it personally at outlets I've worked at. Let's see. The speed at which publication is expected means a piece rarely gets the editorial passes that would catch those before publication, or at least not as thorough passes. You need to understand, in games journalism at places like Gamers, you're expected to have an article written that's like a 300, 400 word piece in 30 minutes. 30 minutes. No wonder why a lot of Gamers outlets have trouble with fact-checking information. Yes, an editor will go through that article, they'll read through it, maybe they will catch issues with facts, but they're expected to maybe have stuff edited out about within 15 minutes or so. That's not enough time. That's not enough time. It's just not. Like, 30 minutes is not enough time to write a 300-word story and make sure all the facts are correct. That is enough time to get some sort of decent copy that might have errors to an editor. It's just not enough time. 30 minutes is insane. My job was to get people to write stuff in 30 to 45 minutes. That was my job as an editorial strategist. Implement that. I definitely stress these problems of games journalism because, guys, I was part of the problem. I took the managerial position. It's really funny. It's really funny, by the way, because people had talked so much shit about me taking the $30 an article rate advice, but I did demonstrably more harm through having the $68K salary than I ever did with the $30 article one. Like, the amount of damage that I did to robbing people of skill building to be better journalists, immensely more significant behind closed doors. Like, that is something that I personally feel like I am still trying to redeem myself on. But $30 an article, though, was the real issue. My bad. You know what I mean? But that's the thing. Like, so many issues about games journalism, like this problem right over here, this is not happening in public, right? Like, this is something that, like, the end result of it is happening in public. But, like, the hiring decisions are not being publicly tweeted on Twitter about what's being prioritized and why, and how that's affecting people, and how that's embarrassing colleagues when they see, like, their colleague, like, do, like, a terrible job covering a game. Like, this is, again, a serious issue. Thank you, Tara Lynn, for the sub. I appreciate it. Thank you for the lurk, too. I can see that. I just think, like, if you said X character eye color wrong, the community of that game will vilify you for the rest of your life, and that's shit unfair. I mean, it is. It is. And all the problems of games journalism doesn't make that right. So, like, example, the exact, like, mistakes I made covering VTubers in the past, like maybe getting, you know, like something wrong here and there, it definitely doesn't make it right for parts of the VTubing community to go insane towards me, as Flabberjiggles was mentioning, as like earlier with the VShojo situation. Like, people should have been a little bit more understanding about what I meant around Neanners and VShojo and Gamer Subs, but the kernel of the aspect of like, we don't trust journalists anymore because they've demonstrated issues with like we don't trust the games journalism industry. We don't trust the journalistic enterprises around like gaming and anime and VTubing and stuff like that because they've demonstrated issues. Like, that ultimately goes back to here. Like, that's an organizational problem, an industry problem, a problem with editorial standards, and that's something that had to be fixed and cannot be fixed anymore because there's not enough money to fix it anymore. Like, we're in a death spiral now in games journalism. Thank you for the lurk, Meander. Don't forget, if you're listening, if you're watching, if you're enjoying the vibes, don't forget to either !lurk or lurk redeem. It helps the real lot of Twitch CTV. The instinct to gatekeep even a journalist on it is a bad one. Feeds back into the enthusiast press problem. Exactly. I agree. Don't get me wrong. Okay, so enthusiast, low expert, low trust. What are another cardinal sin is... We're going to get into these good stuff now. Anti-corn. You guys know what I mean by corn by now. You guys must know what I mean by corn by now. Okay. So what I mean by this is very simple. Traditionally speaking, the games journalism industry has not had the most positive relationship with the adult industry. What I mean by that is, you have to understand that a lot of games journalists were coming into games journalism basically saying, you know, like, mom and dad don't see what I'm doing as a legitimate enterprise. And what I'm doing in games journalism, games are already considered so nerdy. They're already considered so weird. They're already considered something that, like, you know, is like not serious. They're a toy for kids. And if I make a big deal about adult stuff in journalism, in games journalism, this is absolutely not going to fly. Like, I'm never going to be taken seriously. So it's a respectability politics issue, right? So if I want to be taken seriously as someone who covers video games, so people don't think that like all I do is cover like things for children, but for serious adults, I'm not going to talk about the adult industry. Like, no way, we're not going to talk about that. This is something that has been a huge issue in games journalism for years. We have absolutely seen outlets, writers, publications try to buck this idea a little bit of being like more against adult content, but the longer history of games journalism is one that's tried to cleave itself off from taking the adult industry particularly seriously. Especially by the time you hit the 2000s and 2010s, this is becoming a major issue when you're literally starting to see writers who are like, you know, having relationships with like the adult side of the industry where they're very critical of it, where they're talking about adult games that have like more taboo themes as if they're literally like the worst thing in the world and harmful. This is a huge... Big corn. Snake, I want you to eat me, big corn. Those little sound makers on bikes, journalists hate those. That's like actually so true. I would say in games journalism, the issue with kind of looking down on adult content became a bigger issue in the digital world in the 2000s, 2010s. Like, I think that's when it started to become a far bigger issue. And let me explain this a little bit too, because I did talk about around the 2010s also seeing sort of like this embrace of like the indie kind of queer, like sexual game. But even then it was a bit of a difficult relationship. So basically, here's what I would say. In the 2000s and the 2010s, like I mentioned in my Sex Ed 101, my Spicy Ed 101 as we call it, stream on porn addiction, excuse me. As I mentioned at the time, we kind of walked into an era where essentially, the 2000s and 2010s, people were becoming more and more aware that porn was like freely available on the internet. It was so easy to access on things like, for example, Pornhub. And so what started to happen over time was essentially people became more and more familiar with the existence of pornography on the internet. And they really wanted to come in and start to criticize and question the proliferation of adult content. There's this feeling that sort of like adult content is all over the place, and they want to, make adult content. They want to criticize it. They want to depict adult content as something that's sort of like for the skeevy, the perverted, the creepy. Like, it's something that's not a serious endeavor that should be taken seriously. Now, that's not always the case in the 2000s and 2010s. We do also start to see more serious adult content journalism. And like I mentioned, there does start to be this kind of cleaving out within the games journalism space. For example, Kara Ellison talking about sexuality in games, for coverage of indie games, especially queer and feminist, like indie games that talk about sex. But the cleaving out happens for sex in games when the sex or the sexuality, the adult content, has some sort of larger artistic purpose. Like, there has to be, on some shape or form, some reason why a game that has sex or adult content has literary value. Otherwise, the only other reason to cover it is because someone is connected to somebody. I think the major turning point for this was Lady Killer in a Bind. I think when Christine Love sat down and said, what I'm going to do is create a lesbian BDSM game, and this is what I'm going to do. And that's that. That was a major change for the industry, because Christine Love was a very popular indie game developer at the time. I mean, she still is popular, but she was huge at the time. She was huge for her visual novel work. And she was well connected, and people sat down, they said, fuck it, I'm going to cover the Christine Love BDSM game. And that really did start to change things a little bit in the industry finally. That did start to get people to think and consider, maybe we should take adult games more seriously. Maybe we should make a little bit more room for that. But that really was the exception to the rule overall. It was seen as skeevy. It was seen as something that, like, you wouldn't give super serious coverage to. People really tried to distance themselves from it or criticize in some shape or form, treat it as gross, weird, strange, etc. You did start to see kind of instances here and there would poke through where people would take it seriously, but it would only be a couple times, and usually through the censorship discussion, some shape or form. Like, you did have at Kotaku some conversation about NCOS trying to censor Steam games, and trying to get Steam games pulled, and then Steam reversing its policy on, like, no adult games, circa, what was it, like 2018 or so. And, one of the writers that covered that was Nathan Grayson, who also has traditionally done a good job trying to cover that aspect in gaming in some shape or form, and was, I think, save for Nicole Carpenter, the only writer at Aftermath to also cover the PayPro censorship issue. So you do have a couple people here and there that are covering this issue in some shape or form, or even writing about these games, but it's pretty rare. It's not really that common, and usually to write about this stuff, you need to prove in some shape or form that there is something of a higher artistic value. Otherwise, there is this squeamishness about adult content. I think the biggest example of this, honestly, is the simple fact that adult games don't get, they get separated. They don't get the same level of serious treatment in the games journalism industry. They don't get press coverage, they don't get previews, they don't get reviews, they don't get news articles, they don't get people interviewing adult developers. That stuff gets ignored. It's not taken seriously. The only time with which you get any kind of remote news coverage about adult games is essentially if it fits into a larger issue around, like, censorship, or again, some kind of, like, higher art topic, or higher, like cultural topic, like LGBTQ representation. Lady Killer in a Bind was one of the rare examples where an adult game would be taken seriously and get, like, previews and news and stuff like that. And unfortunately, it really was just because the creator of Lady Killer in a Bind was well connected and people took her seriously. That's it. Everyone else could get fucked. And that's not to, like, go to Christine Love and be like, oh my god, like, Christine Love, like, nepotism. Although we're about to talk about that. But that was a serious issue for That was it is a really good example, though, of the issue that adult developers face, which is you either had some sort of maybe you created slightly or just completely safe for work games and then switched to NSFW, or you were just kind of fucked. Like, you were just kind of fucked. You were not going to get that coverage. And again, not Christine Love's fault for leveraging the connections that she had, and also being someone on the radar of so many like game developers. She was and is a very talented indie game developer, but you can't necessarily have one exception fix the rule. That's just not how it works. Let me drink my Picari Sweat, and we will talk about what I would consider the last and final cardinal sin. So let me drink more Picari Sweat. Boop, boop, boo. I love my Miku Sweat. It's so good, dude. It's so good. Corn. We love corn. Oh my god, that feels so good. Oh my god, it feels so good. I fucking love Picari Sweat. I would literally trade my firstborn for Picari Sweat. Miku Sweat sounds wild out of context. It is. In context, it's wild. Delicious. Delicious Miku Sweat. Yummy, 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 yummy. I fucking love my Miku Sweat. I love my Miku Sweat. All right. Bacardi Sweat, I wish. How you doing, Endlessly Big? Bacardi Sweat sounds so good. Like, Picari Sweat with, like, Hatsune Miku. That sounds so good. Okay. Real talk. How is Picari different from other bottled water? It's basically like Gatorade. It's like a hydrating drink. Like, it's got some stuff built into it to hydrate. So, the last but very major cardinal sin, we gotta talk about it, guys. And that is, some of you are gonna hate me for saying this one, but we gotta talk about it. Some of you are gonna hate me for saying this one, but we gotta talk about it. Oh, there it is. Nepotism. Yes. Yes. I remember a number of years ago, I was in a Slack, and I was with a number of games journalists who all felt a little bit on the outside. They were not really like the big shots at Kotaku or Polygon or anything at the time. Maybe had a couple bylines here and there at those sites, but they really felt like they were on the outside. And I remember there was someone in particular in the chat. I'm not going to say who or anything like that. I think they're out of the industry by now anyway. But I remember them sitting there, and they were kind of the most outsider out of all of us. Like, they were the one that was so disconnected. And they were like, the way they went about it and what they were was wrong. But Gamergate was correct about this thing. And I was like, finally someone said it. Holy fuck. I had been sitting for years thinking this to myself and being like, I can't say it out loud. I can't say it out loud because no one's going to hire me. No one's going to take my work anymore. People are going to say, like, you're a Gamergate apologist. But this, everyone knows this is true. Or at least it was true. In the 2010s, here's how it worked. Remember how I talked about all those indie games that were getting coverage? You got coverage if you knew somebody. That's it. You had to know somebody. You had to know a journalist. You had to know a critic. You had to know somebody that was schmoozing up in the journalism world, and you got coverage. And the more connected you were, and the more well-liked you were with the journalists, with the critics, etc., the more coverage you got. This is how it worked. I thought it worked like that on the outside. I became a games journalist and learned it worked like that on the inside. This was correct. This was extremely correct. And everyone fucking knew it. Everyone knew, like, if you wanted the indie, like, mega gaming booth, mega whatever booth at PAX, you had to know somebody. You had to know somebody. If you wanted coverage, you had to know somebody. You had to know somebody. That's how it worked. That's how it worked. That's how it worked. We were deadass taught this in my game dev course in college as well. It's literally true. It's literally true. You have to know somebody, you have to schmooze, you have to be connected, and then you get it. Then you get everything. You get the connections, you get the coverage, you get the opportunities. The more you know people, the more it comes to you. Guys, why do you think I got so many bylines? Like, why do you think the adult sex worker, games journalist got so many bylines in the 2010s and 2020s? It's because I knew people. I figured it out. I was like, oh, okay, I just have to kiss a lot of ass and never tell anyone that this is what I think. I can never admit this fact. And then, like, you meet everyone, it's like, oh my god, it literally is just nepotism. Like, it was from the start, in fact, nepotism. It's who you know, who you're connected to, who you're dating, and who likes you. And that's it. That's it. That's it. This is why I never dated in the industry. Cause like I would be happily befriend people, but I'm not dating people for opportunities. That was fair assessment, sure, but Gamergate quickly changed to not that very quickly. Like the term Gamergate is from Steve Bannon. Gamergate is not from Steve Bannon. That's not true. It was from Alec Baldwin's brother, Adam Baldwin. Adam Baldwin invented the term Gamergate. That's how it originally started. I was there when the Gamergate stuff was going down. This is all too familiar. See, the thing at the time was that people knew that this was true, but they didn't want to admit it out too loud, because if you started to say, yeah, Gamergate was right, though, and people were kind of hinting it there and there. They're like, there's some things that do have, out of the context of Gamergate, truth to it. But no one wanted to point blank admit, like, yeah, there's a nepotism problem. Because if you did that, then people were afraid that you would be enabling sort of like the harassment of games journalists and game developers and anyone that stood up to like the mobbing that was happening at the time. But this was the big thing that everyone knew was true. And a lot of kind of the throwing like logs onto the fire were some game developers coming out and saying, like, I hate that I gotta know people, and I hate that I have to be connected to get coverage. Something that I wanted to do when I was a games journalist that was established, when I was a daily dot, had my full-time income, my permalance shit, I could do whatever the fuck I want. Didn't matter. I could write about whatever I wanted. One thing I wanted to do from the start was say, okay, I'm going to find the games that are cool. I'm going to find the stuff from people that are not connected, and I'm going to write about their stuff. Because no one is doing that. No one is saying, I saw a cool game. I get nothing out of this. Here's the cool game. It's an adult game. Here's the cool game. I'm going to write about it. No one was doing that. I mean, like, okay, people were. But, like, at large, like, overall, the vibe was, like, you write about a game from maybe, like, a friend of a friend. You get a little bit of a favor out of that. And that's not cool. That whole era, what really squicked me really bad was when 4chan invented their woman sock puppet character to just take their misogynistic crap, just caption under her as if it was a woman saying it. I don't know if anyone remembers that. That was Vivian James. Of course I remember Vivian James. Oh my god, I remember Vivian James. Her name's Vivian James because it sounds like video games if you say it fast enough. And she's V's daughter. And she has the Piccolo colors. Like the gif of like Piccolo and sexual assault. My wife, that's a crazy statement. That's a crazy statement. It's all about access. It is. This is one of the biggest cardinal sins of games journalism in the 2010s. Who you know becomes a very big deal. It's how you get access to things. It's why people write about you. Because they know you. Because they think you're cool. It's not because like what you're doing actually do they personally think is like relevant culturally or is being ignored. One thing that I used to do was just like go through Itch.io and just like look at cool shit and write about it. Like I didn't give a fuck. Because I thought it was important to highlight creators and artists and writers that were not getting, you know, any press coverage. Because I thought, you know, like if you're working on a cool project, like regardless of who you know, how connected you are, how much press coverage you have or have not got, if you think your project is cool, I'm going to write about it. Like that was my animating principle. I felt it was really important to break from this idea. I thought it was really important to break from the idea that what I do is cover people who know like my friends. I just didn't want to do that. What a weird time to come back. Yeah. Like I was saying earlier, this concept applies to any career. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But you can kind of see if these are like the 4 cardinal sins, you can kind of see how these all kind of apply to each other, right? You get an enthusiast press, especially an enthusiast press, where you can't criticize certain people. You have low expertise. Low expertise leads to low trust. You have low expertise combined with a sort of sentiment that's like pro-censorship in some cases, or otherwise is antagonistic to adult content. So you have this pissing certain readers off, certain gamers off, combined with this. So people think of games journalists as sort of like nannies that are not good at video games. Like, you can see how all this ends up kind of blurring together as sort of like the 4 major original cardinal sins of games journalism, with this kind of being like the final newest cardinal sin. 10 years later, I now look back and think, what even was that? Yeah, it's like so much has happened, dude. Oh my god, so much has happened. It's fucking insane, fucking nuts. But yeah, that's what I would say are the 4 cardinal sins of games journalism. Chad, is this real? Chat, is this real? It's extremely real, chat. Really quickly, before we get to the next part, if you like what you see, follow, subscribe, hit that sub button, gift subs, yippee biddies. They're all really appreciated. Don't forget to follow and sub. We'll also be doing a part 2 to the stream tomorrow, 6 p.m. Cazdell, giving your channel points to mommy. Yummy. Back from burrito making, we at Nepo Babies. Oh, we just finished Nepo Babies. We went through the Nepo Babies. The babies have been Nepo'd. We're going to the next part. You're so cute, Cast. Thank you for giving mommy your channel points. Yummy. Alright, so the next part is going to be about okay, Bofa. No, just kidding. Bofa's for tomorrow. We're talking about Ligma tomorrow. Okay. So, I am not going to do a super long stream today because I've been feeling that I am like a little bit on fumes since I started the stream. So I'm going to do this category, and then anything else we're going to save for tomorrow. I'm just going to jump straight to it. Why no PayPro? Let us talk about it, chat. Why are a lot of games journalists not covered the payment processor situation? This is going to get into a lot of the core issues that kind of define where games journalism is in 2025. Here's the big one. Here's the big one right away, chat, right away. Google. It's Google. What you need to understand about Google in 2025 and games journalism in 2025 and all those things is, in 2023, there was an algorithm update that Google put out, and it was basically apocalyptic for a lot of the media industry. It was a major content update. It tanked traffic for a lot of websites. It led to a lot of layoffs. And a big thing that basically happened there was Google adjusting the algorithm, understanding that a lot of people were searching like blah, 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 query Reddit. They understood that, generally speaking, articles were not getting as much traffic, even though they're still getting a lot, that people preferred user-generated content, so it started to prioritize that stuff. And also, as that was happening, there was already well-known a policy at Google that if you're covering adult content, adult coverage, NSFW coverage, if you are going to do that, you might get dinged by Google and your visibility might get hit. So, imagine you're me, right? Imagine you're me. I'm the $68,000 a year editorial strategist, cashed out on all the goodwill I did in games journalism. My job now is to make you write articles in 30 minutes and edit them in 15. And my job is to understand and communicate that we have to be careful about 2 NSFW of a coverage. 2 NSFW of your primary images. Because Google might ding the website, and we are already suffering. We're already having a bad 2023. The traffic is in the toilet. So we cannot have any sexy images for your primary images, okay? We cannot have big boobied anime women. Those tits must be censored. And I'm not going to tell you again. Because Google's already put us in the shitter. We cannot be afforded to further be put in the shitter. This is where most of our traffic is. It's not social media. It's not people subscribing to our newsletter. It's not BOFA. And it's certainly not Ligma. It's Google. Google is king still for most journalistic outlets, which is why you have the SEOification and slopification of SEO everywhere in games journalism, because Google is king. And Google hates adult content. It will ding you so hard. At Gamers, sometimes we hit a point where we were just nuking NSFW listicles from certain sites and maybe pushing them on other sites that were like bad domains. Because Google hated that stuff so much, we knew we were getting dinged at with Google on certain sites or certain things, and we just need to recover traffic, so it's gone time. This is why at the Mary Sue, my NSFW coverage stopped. Because, bam, this happened. Now, it wasn't like Vice, where I was going to put up a fight for a little bit and try to get things through because I was fucking done with everything and I was tired and I was like, fuck this, man. I want to do what I can do to write about like giantesses or whatever. You know, that was $68,000 I was making, and I was not getting paid to write. I was getting paid to like implement strategy. I was going to play along with whatever and like help implement whatever. And it wasn't like my idea to censor NSFW stuff or anything. It was just like kind of something that I was in the room aware that was happening, or I was making sure that like, you know, primary images going on the site weren't like too explicit, helping direct editors saying, hey, this is the problem, it needs to be dealt with. But this is a big problem. And this, in 2025, is one major reason why you're not going to see certain websites really lean into the pay-pro conversation, the adult content censorship conversation, when big scary words like incest or mommy come up, because they don't want to get dinged by Google. They don't. I actually think this is a big reason why Aftermath is not covering this issue. Like, this is the most charitable reading I can have of the situation. I do think Aftermath understands that if they cover adult content or anything to do with adult content too significantly, that they might get dinged by Google. So I think actually that is a major animating principle to their avoidance of this topic. I think it's actually not so much that they don't care as that they need to make sure that Google doesn't like fry them. Mommy, you will. You were making 60K? I was making 68K. I was about to make 70K. I was so close. I was trying to get 75K in 2023. But I got rejected at 68. And then I didn't get a raise again for 2024 and left my job. Making that money. Oh, yeah. That was the most I ever made in games journalism. Is the most I'm ever going to make in my life. Unless content creation is like crazy good for me. Should have been 69K. At least it wasn't 67K. Six, seven. Six, seven. Okay. They took my tits, so I can't feed my baby. Can't have shit on Google. So true. I don't get the 6'7" thing. I heard. Ow! I heard it once and I don't get it. It's about like a basketball player. I'm like 6 or 7. Like 6, 7. Screaming and not in the way I want to be. What if you meet a girl and she's 6, 7? Pump and dump scam. So Google is a big part of this. And I think there is some anxiety about Google affecting things. I do think a lot of outlets were able to successfully argue that the payment processor situation of like Steam and itch.io and all that stuff was so big and needed to be covered, but they weren't going to stay on top of this issue. Another thing. So now that we've done the very most charitable reading, we're going to do the least charitable reading. They don't care. No, they really don't give a fuck. like obviously this is a big part of it. But I'm telling you, there are plenty of games journalists that truly do not give a fuck. Like, they don't care. They really don't give a fuck. Oh, your taboo, your incest games are gone. Whatever. Literally, that's the way that a lot of games journalists think. I don't give a fuck about your incest game. Oh, the Coffin of Andy and Lele made it. That one should have gone too. Like, that is actually how some games journalists think. And this is just how it is. Like, there are, especially, I would say, if you're part of the school of games journalism that came up during the 2000s, early 2010s, before folks like myself, if you're from that era, there's a very high chance this is how you're operating. This is why adult coverage in the more liberal and loose times of, like, you know, kind of games journalism in the early 2010s when it was getting more avant-garde, this is why a lot of those folks ignored this issue, because they were saying, like, lol, I really don't care. Whatever, like, it's porn's gross and yucky and disgusting and misogynistic, unless it's like my queer friend from Brooklyn, then like it's actually so based and epic. Otherwise it's gross and misogynistic, even especially when other queer people do it. Unless it's my friend, then it's like cool, but otherwise it's gross. Like, that's exactly what's definitely been going on. And I think that's the truth. I think a lot of games journalists don't give a fuck. They're like, I don't buy a Koyokatsu Party. I've never bought an Eroge before. Meanwhile, like, every other person that's interested in games is like a huge fucking gooner. Like, even like the most progressive ones. Have you guys noticed that like the progressive parts of the VTubing community, everyone there is like a huge fucking gooner? Like, come on. Like, literally, like, this is a really good example of the disconnect that's happened. Like, the significant disconnect that's led to, like, people that would have been games journalist readers to go to content creators like myself instead. Porn is an inherent violence upon women, so we're going to tell women what they're allowed to make for the women. Yeah. VTuber and horny are borderline synonymous at this point. Yeah, just call it lewd tubing completely. Lil Mean Babyface. Hi, Goth Soft Girl. Hi, Raven. Ooh. I have no audio right now. Sucks. Cringe. Sag. Better than being pro-corn and Christian. Yeah, so true. Yeah, they just don't care. Like, I think actually, like, a lot of people are gonna say, hey, I do care, it's just I'm held up, and so they do care. Like, there's just, like, the industry sucks right now, and, like, everything sucks shit, and, like, it's awful, and, like, they would write about it, but, like, there's X and Y and Z, it's been a busy month, there's not much room to cover this issue. But really, like, honestly, I think a lot of games journalists don't give a fuck. They're like, sex work's bad, porn is weird. That is actually just a thing. Especially the 2000s, 2010s folks. They will sit there and say, like, I didn't cover this shit when I was at Kotaku. I'm not covering it now. Which is a shame, because there were also a lot of people from the era who were covering it. Like, Cecilia Anastasio was covering all the stuff about sexual harassment at the time. Who did she also interview? The guy that runs Faku. And she is, like, not, like, she's like the antithesis of someone who is not a gooner. Like, she is, like, so... I feel like me and her, our careers are like literal opposites, except we're both feminists. But she is like such a good example of someone who like could have chosen this path, but was like, yeah, I'm gonna interview like the guy that runs Faku because that's like based. Like, there's a different pathway that these games journalists can choose. Another thing, Google don't care, lol. Okay, here's another really important one. Okay. So, for this part, this one is going to sound really familiar for anyone that's followed my story in particular of getting censored by Vice. But I'm trapped at work, so I'm muting, but it's fun to watch. Anna posturing like a drill sergeant with a boss baby face. Thank you. What do you think will happen in the near future and what can be done? I'll talk about that as soon as I finish this section, because it's a good question. Excuse me. That's a rare excuse me from burping on stream. Even if someone does care, and this kind of is related to the Google issue, right? Like, they're twinsies. They're twinsies. A huge issue is, even if you want to cover it, even if you do care, even if it's something that's really meaningful to you, the org that you work for might censor you anyway. They might say, this is not going to fly, your job might be a risk, an editor might pull your article anyway, an editor is going to shoot it down even if you want to cover it. What happened to me was obviously very extreme, and that's because of the particular decay of journalism at Savage Ventures' own properties. Like, Savage Ventures is like a content mill place at this point, but like they run their websites like content mills, but the org censorship issue is in fact a very real issue. And I think this is one reason why you see some orgs do a bit of coverage, but they don't lean in too hard because they know editors or people in higher level positions are going to shut it down. And there's only so much they can do. There's really only so much they can do. So it is a mixture of also the Google issue, like there's nervousness that if you cover too much about adult content, you might get affected. This is particularly, they go hand in hand together when you're talking about more of the long-term coverage that you normally would see, the day twos, the writing about things like interviewing adult developers that were affected or might be affected or who are scared, interviewing queer developers who do some adult content. Like, this is why you have this issue. Like, these are interconnected, but also you will absolutely see the situation of orgs becoming more censorious because they understand the threat of things like Google, or they're just not really down with adult content anyway. They want to keep things looking safe, looking not too controversial. Content mills is a nice way to say sweatshops. To become a David Frost or any other journalist of integrity is to be a problem for anyone that has command of the editorial board. It is very true. It is very true. Another issue with why you are not seeing PayPro coverage. Let me explain this part. So there is like don't care, org censorship, Google. There's also two. That's the right way to put it. Google, don't care, org censorship. There's one more part. It's on the tip of my tongue. TwitchCon staff just threw all the gifts given at everyone's meet and greet in the trash. Wait, really? I was considering talking about TwitchCon today. I might talk about it tomorrow. Dude, that whole thing sucks ass. If I wasn't reliant on Twitch to like eat food right now, I don't know if I'd use this platform. I'm so furious about what happened with Twitch. They just do not care about women, dude. Like, Twitch does not give a fuck about women. Like, I hope that's really obvious to everyone. Twitch does not give a fuck about women. Like, they really don't. Like, that's what's going on. They don't give a fuck about cis women. They definitely don't give a fuck about trans women. And they certainly don't give a fuck about any woman that was harassed at TwitchCon. They don't give a fuck. They don't care. They don't care. They just want the problem to go away. Thank you for the 10 gifted, Wilma. Oh my goodness. I should say more base takes. Thank you. I appreciate you, Wilma. It seems remarkably evident they don't care about women in general. They don't. There have been so many issues at TwitchCon for so many years now. This is not a new thing at TwitchCon. For folks here that are kind of just familiar with VTubing and don't really follow TwitchCon stuff or anything in the streamer realm, this is not a new issue. Like, what happened to, like, Emiru was particularly egregious, but this is not a new issue. This is not a new issue at all. Stalking, sexual harassment, all sorts of shit have been going on for years. Emiru had to drop like 10K on security, guys. Do you think like most streamers can afford 10K on security? No. Some streamers, like, they literally, like, maybe they can afford, like, I don't know, buying a friend lunch to watch over them. It's fucking insane. Twitch does not give a fuck about women. Like, they just don't. Could these creators sue TwitchCon over these things? I think they could, but I think there's a real fear that, like, you're gonna lose your income if you do. fucking content creation is literally like doing neo-feudalism. That was another thing I was going to mention too. Have you noticed, like, this was something I was going to discuss early on, but I think now is a good time because TwitchCon came up. One thing I noticed when I was doing research for this stream, games journalist outlets really didn't cover what happened to her at all. Like, they did do one story, but in the heyday, every games journalist outlet will be talking about these constantly, doing like takes and analysis and opinion pieces. I hope you guys understand everything I just talked about and how like games journalism is falling apart and stuff like that. One major way it's falling apart is truly people not giving a fuck about marginalized people, which is actually exactly my next point. Literally. No care about the marginalized. Okay. I talked about this earlier, guys, on Blue Sky. Have you guys noticed that no one's talked about Niara at all? Niara, like my VTuber friend, the trans VTuber, is literally like out here right now tanking all of the right-wing like gamer people in a way that's similar to like what Alyssa Mercante was dealing with. Now, Alyssa got it in a particularly centralized way, but Niara kind of deals with the same thing as well. Have you guys noticed? No one's in games journalism is talking about Niara. And you might say, oh, well, she's a VTuber, whatever, it doesn't matter. One, she does gaming content.
I want mommy, I want milk, I want to
Thank
be
you,
held,
Nyaruko, for the raid. We're talking about how much games journalism sucks. You will notice, one, that no one has talked about what Niara has gone through at all. And you might sit there and say, well, Niara, is not really like a gaming streamer, which is not true because she plays so much fucking Valorant. Like she is a gaming streamer. She does most of her content is yapping while playing Valorant. But the other thing is that like she's getting targeted by all the big gaming streamers like Osmongold, like the big right-wing streamers. Like literally like all the hate against her started because of Osmongold. And yet no one that still has a job in games journalism, especially the independent outlets, have the balls to talk about what she's been through at all. Like none of them have the balls. And I guess some of them are sitting there and saying like, I went through Gamergate, I don't want the hate on our website, maybe I'm an independent venture. But at some point, you have to sit there and fucking get some balls. Like, you are a journalist, okay? Like, games journalist, it's in the phrase. Fucking talk about it, dude. Because if you don't talk about it, then us content creators have to pick up the slack. And it would be very nice, because we're going to talk about it regardless, because fuck you. Like, it would be very nice if the people that I worked alongside for a decade talked about this. It would be very nice. This is the other thing. It's not just that they don't care about porn. You can really sense it these days that people do not care about the marginalized people in the community. You'll have like independent ventures like talk about like unionization and stuff like that, but that stuff's kind of safe. Like, Osmongold's not going to talk about you or your publication if you write about unionization. But if you say like Niara, a trans VTuber, does not deserve to be harassed, you are so getting on Osmongold's stream. And I think there's a kind of cowardice about it. Like, don't get me wrong, like, no one deserves to get targeted in that way, and everyone has the right to make threat assessments about what they want to report on and stuff like that. But the moment you say, we're not covering this, and we're not going to talk about like the harassment that trans people are going through because we don't want to get harassed, it's a chilling effect. And if people that have been in the industry for like 15 or 20 years don't want to talk about those things, people that have been here for 10 years don't want to talk about those things, 5 years, because the people that are senior and have independence have protection. Or rather, they put up a shield. And when they talk about these things happening, the harassment of the most marginalized in the space, when they do that, what ends up happening is other people speak up too. Other people get brave and say, I'm going to talk about it as well. But if it's only one person and they're not getting any support, they're either going to stop talking about it or they're going to get mobbed. This is the big reason why I talk about how much I dislike the independent part of games journalism, because they don't talk about this. They don't care. Like, they actually don't care. Like, literally. They don't care about what happens to us. Have you noticed that, like, all these independent games journalism sites that popped up, and I'm not even going to say specific names because it's not just one. Have you noticed that they don't really talk about trans issues at all? Have you noticed that, like, maybe they throw a bone to us now and then, but that's really it? Like, we do not get cared about or talked about in that space. And then you look at the masthead, and it's like 75% white people and like 99% cis people. Like, white cis men, I meant to say. Not just white people. White cis men, and then like 1% is like, oh, like, we also got like someone who's not binary too, by the way. It's like crazy. People apparently really loved it when I dunked on the Roach King. Base. Thank you for the head pats, by the way, chat. And it's awful that someone like him is the biggest political streamer in the world. Yeah, like, he's literally one of the top streamers on Twitch, period. Like, if not the top. We're not going to talk about it because we don't want to be attacked. Okay, so the next people we're going to say that about are going to be gay people, then people of color, and then just women in general. You will find that a lot of these independent journalist outlets, games journalism outlets that are popping up, they are losing some steam. Because there is a feeling that, like, they're not actually meeting the mark of what's been requested. Like, they will say, like, Charlie Kirk sucks, but they won't actually do this. And this is really what people want right now. Like, this is actually what people want from independent journalism right now. Like, they really want this to happen because they feel betrayed. They feel like the mainstream's betraying them. Like, they feel like this is happening with the mainstream on the PayPro issue, so they would like the non-mainstream to talk about this issue. And you'll notice that they're ignoring the big cultural conversations on not just the PayPro stuff, but trans stuff, queer stuff, feminist stuff. It's not happening. They're not doing it. They're not covering it. And that's a problem. Like, if games journalism is not going to do this, then it's going to die. Like, it's just going to die. Because people are going to go, here's what's going to happen, okay? You guys are going to come to people like me instead, because I am going to talk about this stuff. Like, I might not talk about it the same way that Niara does. Like, I might avoid, like, trying to beef with specific, not beef, that's not nice to Niara. I might avoid, like, openly criticizing specific, like, right-wing creators, but I will talk about the issues in the same way that I would as if I still had, like, my job at Daily Dot or Vice, in a way that's different from what's happening at both the independent and mainstream games journalism enterprises. Like, I am doing this. I do care about you. And what's happening is people are noticing that this is happening, and they're gonna come to content creators like myself, like Niara, like Alyssa. Like, they're gonna move to those people instead. So it's important to stress that what's happening here is yet another example of, like, the death spiral of games journalism causing content creation to actually become more progressive, getting more games journalist voices into content creation. It's okay to hire trans queer people as long as they are one of the good ones that complain about queer people and are anti-woke. So, yeah. This is a really infuriating thing, though. This, you could tell, like, this makes me livid. Like, I am extremely angry that this is happening, because in a lot of ways, you know, like, this is not like strangers. Like, these are people that I know and have had a drink with, not defending people like myself. And to which I say, why did I get so many fucking drinks with you? If I had the degree on journalism, I'm more than certain that I would never be hired to do my job. Yeah, it do be like that. So, yeah. I'm gonna lay down on the floor. And any questions you guys want to run by me before we wrap up stream, I'm down. I would go longer, but I am a little tired. So I'm gonna lay down on the floor in a very melodramatic way. And any questions you got, feel free to use the sex ed questions thing, because I'm too lazy to edit it. And we can talk about, like, the portion of things we discussed regarding games journalism today. I know it's somewhat limited. It's not everything in the realm of games journalism to discuss. But we will be having more conversation with Kel tomorrow, so don't worry. Anyway, lay down and be pillow. I love being pillow. Oh, wait, okay. This is gonna get sussy. Oh my god. Oh my god, I feel comfy. Okay. Okay, hold on a second, chat. Oh. Okay. For some reason, like, the way I'm laying down is not playing nice with VR chat, so give me 1 second. It's like I'm all over the place. Give me 1 second, chat. There we go. Okay. Oh, almost got it. Yeah, there we go. Oh my god, I'm like so laying down pilled right now, like you don't even know. Okay. There's me. This is me. Alright, chat. Alright, ask me your questions. Fire away. I'm ready. I do not have the gun with me at this time, but I'm sure a lot of you will be understanding. I feel comfy. I feel comfy. Okay, Twin Tails. Yes, I remembered your last question, so let me go up and address that right away. Oh, Cass said Twitch is already about to be in hot water for refusing to let people bring their diabetes supplies into the con with them. Legally, they cannot stop diabetics from bringing their insulin stuff. I'm just amazed at the level of unprofessionalism that's happened, like with Twitch. It's just crazy. The first thing corporate lawyers do is slam every door they physically can under the guise of preserving the status quo, as if this isn't completely flipping the status quo off in the tracks and off the cliff. So true. Let's see. Where was your post? What do you think will happen in the near future, and what can be done? Games journalism is in a death spiral. Okay, like that is the reality. Games journalism is actively falling apart. I'm not saying this because I'm a little mad that I'm out of games journalism right now, that I still wanted to write advice for a little while longer to pay the bills easier. Like, it's nothing like that. It's not like any kind of like pettiness that I'm saying that. Like, what is happening at this point in time is the wheels are coming off. The wheels have been coming off for a couple years now. It is not going to get better. What is going to happen is games journalism is going to continue to circle the drain. More people are leaving the industry. The quality of reporting coming out of games journalism is getting so bad that with the with everything around TwitchCon, a lot of the major reporting coming out is not from games journalism, is not from anyone that's like a streaming centric like games journalist site. It's from like major like normal reporting like NBC News covering this stuff. Like, I cannot stress enough that essentially what is happening is that games journalism chose a path that is going to end in a significant destruction of the industry. Will the industry survive and be able to rebuild? I do think so, but I think the path that games journalism is going down is inevitable. There is no future for games journalism in its current state. It's done. So I think people need to simply allow the drain circling to happen so we can rebuild. I know this is not a fun thing to think about, but I'm not gonna lie, guys. GameFile, Aftermath, all these independent games journalism sites, among all of them, it's really only GameFile that's actively pushing the needle, and that's simply because of the person behind it being so well connected and just being like, okay, I'm just going to report. I'm just going to do reporting. I'm going to do hard news. The independent ventures, a lot of them are very commendable. I have a lot of criticism of Aftermath, but even what they're doing is very commendable. But they are not pushing the needle in the way that independent games journalism needs the needle to be pushed to salvage the industry. Nor do I think it's very fair to expect independent games journalism to salvage the industry. I don't think that's a fair thing to ask. It's like asking Defector to like salvage like Gawker style reporting. Like Defector is very successful and is doing an excellent job and is a fantastic model for independent journalism. But Defector can only do so much, nor should it be expected to do beyond what it's capable of currently doing. It's hard. I think there really is, in my opinion, no future for games journalism as it exists, except letting things crash. Like at this point, we need to just let it crash. Let it die its death, and just be prepared for the future and hope that a better iteration of the industry emerges. I know a lot of folks here will probably sit there and say that's extremely pessimistic, and I cannot believe that that is what you think should happen. That's what you think will happen. But what else is there to do? What else can be done? Nothing. Like seriously. We've had like some of the best minds in the industry have been thinking about this issue, and they've basically all concluded that the best thing you do is to just try to hold on and maybe just leave or become a content creator or grab onto a good position and don't let go. That's kind of it. There's nothing can be done. The industry is basically crashing. And anyone who is looking to fix the industry right now is going to meet a bad end. Like in the sense of like they're going to find themselves very depressed about facing the inevitable reality that the industry has failed. It is not able to do what it was supposed to do. And the reason why games journalism crashed is very complicated. I didn't get enough time to go through it tonight because I just didn't have enough energy. But a lot of the reasons why it has crashed the way it has to do with, the SEOification of things, the kind of media conglomeration of things through places like Gamers and Valnet, the emergence of chasing Google traffic at the expense of chasing readership, the inability to, as I mentioned with the cardinal sins section, for those of you that missed just right over there, the cardinal sins section, the inability to address the cardinal sins of games journalism and successfully overcome their issues. I think the only issue that's been overcome in games journalism to some shape or form is the nepotism issue, and it's simply because all of the apparatus that made nepotism a successful career choice has been destroyed. Like, I need to stress, like, there is no indie games coverage, like, in a serious way. That died in the late 2010s. And I think for someone like myself, like, unfortunately, I know in my case, like, I didn't get the memo. Like, I was still trying to do it in a way that wasn't sustainable in the end, because any reasonable editor would say, like, this is not making traffic, you gotta fucking give it up. It's fucked. It's the other thing is that the economy is about to collapse, like, in a significant way in the United States. So a lot of the remaining entities are going to see further layoffs. A lot of folks are simply leaving the industry. Guys, my editor advice doesn't work in games journalism anymore. He left with me and he switched to PR. And you better believe that the PR industry is treating him much better than the games journalism industry ever did. So I don't blame him. I'm so happy he did that. I'm a little insane for becoming a VTuber. Like, I'm not going to lie. So I think it really needs to be stressed that nothing can be done. This is a path that was decided on many years ago with the emergence of conglomerates. I think the beginning of the end was the death of I think it was the death of Fanbyte was the beginning of the end. I think that was the moment when it started to end. Like, I also had some issues with Fanbyte that I'm not going to get into as the former reporter there, but what Fanbyte was doing was really important and good for the industry, and its death was a signal that the few good parts of the industry were unsustainable. And that's it. You'll notice that a lot of the attempts to do something like Fanbyte have not succeeded significantly. I will not say they failed, because I think, I don't think that's really fair to a lot of the kind of successor-like projects to Fanbyte, and a lot of the successor sort of things either taking the Fanbyte spirit or like similar to Fanbyte. Like, I think a lot of those projects are trying to do really good things, but they are struggling a little bit. Like, they cannot capture the lightning in the bottle that Fanbyte had. And even then, Fanbyte readership, I think, was relatively lower compared to some sites I've worked with and things like that. I forget the specific numbers there. Anyway, I'll just say that I think the industry entered this kind of death spiral moment, the moment that an entity that was doing a lot of work that was a little, that was opinion-oriented, feature-oriented, a little bit more on the criticism side, just had its massive layoff wave. And it was very sad. Do you think there is room for someone who started up a journalist enterprise modeled after an anarchist scene? Well, we are seeing a lot of readership run independent journalism entities operate. I think if someone has significant funding to keep things running and kind of like let the plane get off the ground to build up readership, then it's great. Like, if they basically have some sort of investment capital to get a zine like that running, then it's not a problem. But okay, if I was creating a journalistic entity in today's day and age, what I would do is this: readership-oriented model with a light amount of SEO, content creation pathway in which we have at least several people doing some form of news-based content creation, political content creation in the realm of games journalism. Both of those parts get significant focus because we want to diversify and have variety. Then we also have additional focus in other areas of interest such as VTubing and anime. And also covering, adult content, because by nature, there's not a lot of competition. We'll be able, if we put it on a separate domain, able to get some level of influence in that space. What I would have to say then is that we would target, even though we do some element of SEO, our core goal would be building up readership over time. So we'd be doing marketing and campaigns to encourage readership to sign up for the site. It would take several years for us to reach a significant level of profitability, because we would be literally trying to bootstrap this shit for a significant amount of time. I know, to their credit, Aftermath did take some time to really have lower salaries in order to make the site work. I was under the impression that it's still the case now. I literally think a lot of them are taking salary cuts to make sure their freelance pay is good, but I don't know what their budget is like today. I just very briefly talked to Nathan a couple of years ago about contributing and potentially coming on as a co-owner when he was generally floating the idea as something they might do. It was never a serious conversation we had, though. Obviously, nothing like that would happen today with me and them. But yeah, just to say, it could work. It would be very difficult. You would have to get people that are very strategically minded to run it, and you would have to be very serious about it. If for someone to make that work, they would have to make it their life, and they would have, it's their baby, it's the biggest thing they care about, and they would have to get very serious about the strategy side of things. They would have to get very serious about that. Feels like a lot of people are independent not to do hard journalism, but to just make it easier to construct a reality where their escapism isn't also under attack. I think the thing that's important to note about places like Aftermath that are doing a lot of fluff writing is that I don't think that group is trying to escape from the problems of games journalism. I think they're trying to be careful about what they write about I think they do legitimately have limited resources to focus on certain issues. Unfortunately, though, I also think that they sometimes hide behind those lack of resources to not talk about issues that do need to be discussed. So I don't know if it's fully escapism. I do definitely think though a lot of these independent journalistic enterprises, they're able to get away with not covering issues that are really important to marginalized readers or viewers and watchers, etc. And that is a problem. Like, that is a huge problem with, for example, like, that is a huge problem in general with the independent landscape right now. Like, that's just an issue. The board is now a tablet. Real. Your point is just enshittification. Yep. Celebrate the wheels coming off. You'll have a chance to build a better automobile. That is how I feel, although a lot of people are going to continue to lose their jobs. A lot of people are going to have very sleepless nights where they say, like, was all this for nothing? I think it's important to understand that, like, let me put it this way. A lot of games journalists are not choosing the content creator path. So it puts people like myself and Alyssa who are choosing that path. And when I say choosing that path, I mean very specifically, like, okay, I'm going to create a schedule. I'm going to stream a lot. This is my life now. A lot of games journalists did not choose that pathway as a significant career option. A lot of them also were, quite frankly, not crazy and insane like I am. And so there is not an oversaturation in the YouTube and Twitch sphere for people like myself who started in games journalism and then became some form of, like, streamer, content creator, and especially VTuber, because not a lot of games journalists are VTubers. I think I know, like, just, like, I really don't know that many. But what has happened as a result is, I think I think there's going to be a point where, like, I'm hitting Twitch partner and doing, like, the 100 CCV plus streams. And I think the switch is going to flip for some former games journalists. Like, I gotta do that. Like, I gotta do that. Like, I think there's a moment where they're going to say, like, I should be making the big money like Anna is too, or whatever. Like, when I hit that spot and when there's, like, significant income coming in. And it's going to be really hard for that group to monopolize on that, because the opportunity to get in as a content creator, game journalist, was last year. Like, in my personal opinion, it's last year or right now. And it's a little bit hard if you miss that window, because it's going to just it's just going to be less novel now. Like, the content creator games journalists have emerged. Like, we are here now. Like, the hybrid model of us, we are vibing and we are existing. And it's going to get a little bit harder. So I think one thing that's especially challenging and something that really feels bad is that the like, a better industry might emerge from the ashes of this one, but a lot of people are going to lose their jobs. Still, a lot of people are going to exit the industry, and a lot of people are unfortunately not going to get in on the ground of the opportunity to build something outside of the industry that monopolizes on the connections of the industry. Unfortunately, for a lot of folks that have worked in games journalism, the only answer for them is simply to start over in another industry, whether that's PR or otherwise. It is very sad. It's very depressing. I feel like this is a lot, especially in the Anglosphere, but that doesn't mean it's creating a lot of harm. Like, I do think we need to find more sources besides big corpos and indies. Sometimes you need the wrecking ball and redo everything from the ground up. Everything is screwed long before your time, kiddos. This is just like the tower in Tarot. Chaotic upheaval occurs, leaving behind a chance to rebuild on more solid foundations. I think that's a pretty accurate assessment. Like, what's going on is literally the tower. But if you remember, a lot of times with the tower, like, there's dead bodies. Like, that have fallen from the tower and are, like, impaled. And it's an important reminder that while the tower is treated as a scary card because it represents significant change, the tower's significant change can be very benevolent, or it can be very stressful and harmful and hurtful to a lot of people. Like, it can upheave lives. And there's a reason why the tower has the imagery of people being like someone being impaled on the rocks after the tower falls apart. And that's absolutely what's happened in games journalism. But that's a very apt description as well, Twin Tales, that we are reaching a spot where in the destruction of it all, maybe some good can occur. Unfortunately, though, there's also a great human cost. Okay, what would be your opinion of people trying to get some new outlet going outside of the US with maybe public media funding? It's still really tough. I think a lot of the issues with the Anglosphere and games journalism, like the English-speaking issues, are kind of like everything I already discussed, and it can be a little bit more complicated in terms of games journalism and its perspective outside the US. Like, I would definitely say a lot of the things I just discussed do not apply to the Japanese industry of games journalism, but getting a new outlet going outside of the US with maybe public media funding, I mean, it really does depend on, at the end of the day, you know, the Google issues I discussed are still there. Like, Google censorship is always something you're going to have to navigate. You're always going to have to make sure you have an opportunity to reach your audience and brands. You're going to have long-term strategy. And I think across the media landscape, not just in the Anglosphere, you are having similar issues of journalism under attack. So I do think a lot of the same issues that I discussed do apply. It does vary based on culture and region. I do think, though, that you're ultimately going to find an experience like what Aftermath, what GameFile, and a lot of the other independent ventures like VGBs are going through, are going to be mirrored in some shape or form. Like, I think you have to be a little insane to do either content creation or independent games journalism. And as much shit as I give independent games journalism for, I think, in my personal opinion, not quite meeting the mark, I do have to have a lot of respect for anyone that does independent journalism, because quite frankly, it takes a certain level of insanity to do it. And that insanity has to be married to ambition. And insanely ambitious or ambitiously insane people, I like those types. I have a lot of respect for those types, because I too am ambitious in a way that could be confused for insanity. Thank you for the head pat, Stamonia. Now the real question is, what's going to arise in its place? I don't know. I do think content creation as it exists today is the future of games journalism. I think that you're looking at like that. Like, I think what Alyssa's doing, I think what I'm doing, I think, unfortunately, also, like, as games journalism has died, we've seen that, like, the right-wing video game sphere has picked up some of the pace and picked up some of its influence. And so it's really important for leftist games journalist content creators to emerge, like, again, myself and Alyssa. But it's really hard to say, it's really hard to say what's going to come. I do think, though, that, like, the content that I'm doing, while my approach is very lo-fi, and, like, I don't do, like, interviews with developers and things like that, I just kind of, like, vibe and talk about, like, the news and, like, kind of do analysis. I do think that, like, the content I'm doing, I think the content that Alyssa's doing, and any other journalist that's walked into this sphere, I think does reflect where things are going. And to be fair, this model has existed for some time. I'm not a new one as well. As much as me and Merritt K don't get along, it is accurate to point out that Merritt is a very successful content creator. Like, she has not just been like an editor in games journalism, like she came back to the space. She really understood that she could leverage her brand, and she has a very strong brand and networking opportunities to create, to do content creation in some shape or form. If I recall correctly, her CCV on Twitch is not bad at all. Like, she has good performance, in part because she has a good brand. So I do think that content creation is going to take up the vacuum that traditional media has. And as I discussed in the issue of news tubing, content creators that are trying to do news in some shape or form do need to study and understand the good parts of journalism as well. As I mentioned, my news tuber article about literally VTubers that do news coverage about VTubing, it is really important for those groups to study the good parts of like having, for example, really good editorial scrutiny and examination in order to improve the quality of news tubing. Otherwise, and also it's important for those groups to have buffers from simply alone having a readership that is expecting them to, for example, parrot their talking points. Otherwise, it puts those news tubers at risk of doing bad journalism. I can assure you of this, however, be prepared to learn a lot from the past and to be antagonized. There's one question you'll hear the minute you start asking questions. Have you now or have you ever been a member? So true. Thank you for the lyrics, Seraph and Homer. You crazy, but you're a good succubi. So true. Anna's playing chat up. So true. Yeah, but mostly asked because here, one of the major public TV channels has a lot of funding of very left-leaning shows and an online media division. Until last year, they also funded a weekly gaming news show until those went public, so this might be an option if pitched right. I think there's an opportunity for it. I think it's important to remember that we still have to see how the global economy is going to be affected as things break apart with the U.S., as the economy suffers in the US. So we're gonna have to wait and see how much of like funding is available in kind of the brave new world we're walking into in 2026, because 2026 will be a pretty significantly a year of significant upheaval. Excuse me, but I think it's possible. I just can't give particularly good advice, unfortunately, because my expertise is in the American and Anglosphere side of games journalism. I've never read like non-English games journalism, save for a couple like non-English pieces that I've been interviewed in, or Japanese games journalism, and in both of those cases, it's usually rare specific occurrences. The stock market is apparently up now. Families into stocks and athletics based. I think the economy is going to be in a worse state at the end of the winter, but it's going to take time. Like, I think what's going to happen is I think a lot of businesses are very reliant right now, as they always are, on Black Friday and holiday season spending. And I think what's going to happen is a lot of businesses are going to have significantly decreased holiday spending this year, which will lead to a chain reaction of the economy slumping. I think what's going to happen is Black Friday is going to be horrendously underperforming. And people can lie to themselves about a lot of things, but making less money year over year, you can't lie about that. You can't fudge those numbers. Eventually, you just have less money to buy things and pay people. At some point, like, the lie, you can no longer lie to yourself, because if you make less money year over year, you have to fix that or your business is going to break. I know I sure as hell am not Black Friday shopping this year. I barely buy anything for myself that's not food. Like, and fun VR chat stuff. Maybe a couple video games here and there. And maybe occasionally, like, porn. Otherwise, I don't buy shit for myself. I have no fucking money. Most people don't have any fucking money right now. No one's got fucking money. Everyone's in fucking credit card debt. I remember I was literally talking to two separate VTubers, far more successful than I am in terms of, like, reach, how long they've been doing things, and they're, like, also in massive credit card debt. I mean, like, my case I think is manageable, but they have significant issues with that. I buy you stuff all the time, Anna. Well, that's different. That's different. Don't make me blush. I mean, like, in terms of, like, literally me sitting down and, like, deciding to purchase things on my own. Like, I've not been making, like, I haven't been spending on nice things, just, like, necessities. Because there's no money. Like, I don't have any money. Like, I literally don't have any money. Like, this is my lifeline right now, is YouTubing and content creation. And, like, I'm still a small creator, so it's just, like, to be, like, I can't, you know, I can't, like, necessarily, like, I can't, like, be crazy with my money right now. So, yeah. Oh, it sucks. It's rough, yeah. is what it is. What can you do? But you do have a community that supports you. It's true. I love my community. My community is very, very, very generous. I love you guys so much. I appreciate my community. My community has been not just really generous of me, but very supportive. Like when I say stuff like I'm gonna keep doing the rent thing month over month, no one's ever sat there and like tried to make me feel like I was panhandling or like kind of being like shitty. Like people have been very kind about it, and which means a lot because I've definitely had people like over the years like make fun of me for doing it, and I don't know. It's you know, like it's trans women have a wage gap. Like we just you know, it's just hard to make money without selling your soul. That is, you know, like I left that 68K job for a reason. Just to clarify, I meant doing an English outlet of English journalists, but just not stationed in the U.S. and publicly funded. Maybe if a translation department for the local market. You know, shitty, but those DMs. I think at the end of the day, Neil Ruko, you'd probably still run into all the same issues we've discussed. I think the wage gap is so real, even in high wage sectors like medical. Yeah, I was there was a huge wage gap at gamers. I was clued into it. There was a huge wage gap for women and gamers. Like we were massively underpaid compared to a lot of the men. So, hey, Doling Along, how are you? Hope you're doing well. We're talking about video game journalism. I have candy kisses. Trying to keep as many peeps afloat as I can. Life's tough. It's always appreciated when people are really generous with me. Like, it means a real lot. It really does. I feel very lucky. I feel very lucky that, you know, I've got the opportunities that I have. Thank you for the follow, Nikinko. Hope you're doing well. It took us 3 to 4 to make it somewhat close to our last job's wages, despite a decade of work experience. Yeah, I mean, like, look, like everything we talked about, you know, all this stuff, right? And it's led to a situation where, like, you know, whoops, like all this stuff. Sorry, guys, 1 second. All this stuff. It's led to a situation where there's no jobs, like nothing. Like it's just there's no jobs. There's no jobs anymore. Like it's just not there. No nut. But that's the way it is. Like there's nothing available. Like there's nothing in games journalism anymore. Remember like a year or two Not. Remember a year ago when I told you guys, like, I wrote that piece that was like, why bother applying for this Polygon full-time position? I think they kind of... Exactly. Oh! I think they literally killed that position or something like that. I forget, but... it's like, what's the point? Like, in that position, I was like, I'm not applying for this Polygon full-time staff writer position because, like, or whatever it was, because, like, every other person in games journalism that doesn't have a job right now is applying for that job. And I'm definitely not getting as a transgender woman who does like sex work. Like that's not happening. Not in this lifetime. I'm very lucky I got the jobs I did in my in my past life. Mike Rose sitting at home twiddling his thumbs, there's no jobs. And shitification and charity companies taking advantage of people who get assumed bottom tier work. Yep. There's no jobs. There's just no jobs. They're just not there. That's it. There's not much else to really say.